Gentlemen, welcome. I'm officially back. It's so nice to be standing here at my own workbench looking at stuff. Let's talk about this Dentron. This is a dtr-2000L. This is the one that's got the 8877 tube in it, or the 3CX1500A7. This amplifier has been here for a long time. I picked this up about 2.5 years ago from my friend Mr. G over in Washington. He sent this home with me for me to go through it. He thought there might have been a problem with it. He says that since then he has found that there was a problem in his coax and his feed point of his antenna and a couple other things. Let's see. This thing's been here for so long. I've attempted to repair this thing about 4 times, and what I respect about this guy that owns this piece of equipment the most is a couple times he said no. He said that either things weren't right with him or he wasn't ready to put it into use. One time he was really super sick and he didn't want to deal with it, but he's always stayed in touch with me. Instead of saying, oh yeah, get it fixed and then I'll pay you 6 months from 3 Tuesdays from now. I hate guys that are like that. Just be honest with me. If you don't have the cash in your pocket, that's fine. Tell me. And we'll just set the thing aside and we come back to it at a later date. Well, that's what's happened here. So I finally got the word about, oh God, it's been 2 months ago now, that he was ready. Problem is, I was getting ready to leave town. So I knew that this was going to have to wait until I came back. This should not take that long. I don't think it's going to be that hard to figure out what's going on with it. We're also going to use this amplifier here in another video for Penta, as you guys will see. But for right now, let's focus down on this and let's take a quick look at it. Here is our power wire. So we might need to freshen and clean this up just a little bit. This kind of thing. This amplifier has not been on for a long time. So, you guys that have been watching me for a long time know that the steps on taking a vintage piece of equipment like this and turning it on involves more than plugging it in and just flipping the switch. We want to bring it up on a variac. We want to open it up. We want to look at it. We want to make sure there's no parts that are visually broken, nothing shorting out the high voltage supply. We're going to fire this up. We got to bring it up slow, which means bring it up on a variac. And then the other thing that we need to do is, because the tube is actually worth like double what the amplifier is worth. So we have the amplifier is one unit, the tube is another, and when you put the two together, you have a completed amplifier. But the amplifier by itself, without the tube, is maybe worth $500–600. With the tube, it's worth like $2,500–2,600. This is an actual iMac tube that's in this amp, right? So even the Chinese tubes, like the ones that I'm going to talk about in another video that are made by Penta, which are top-notch, high-quality, very good components, even those tubes, they're not the same as iMac. They're just not. They just don't. They produce the same amount of watts. They last about the same, at least the ones from Penta, last about the same length of time. The iMac tube just brings more money, is my point. So we have to be very careful. That means when we figure out that the high voltage supply is working good and the filament supply and the screen supply and all those kind of things, the bias and all that stuff's all working right, we're going to have to let this sit and run for a little bit of time, let the tube cook in, because we all know in the older metal ceramic bodied tubes, like, I don't know, this thing here, that's what's in this amp, by the way, this exact same tube. This is a dud that I keep around here for, well, visual purposes, and if I drop it, I don't cry about it, but as you guys can hear, it's effed off. In the ceramic tubes, there's no such thing as a perfect vacuum. There's always a little bit of trace gas. The main thing that allows us to have the highest dielectric insulation between the anode and grid ring, ground ring, base ring, whatever, however you want to refer to it, is the vacuum in here. Okay. So your best insulator is a vacuum. Period. Period. Right? Well, when they produce the tubes in the factory, people use the term burn in, which is wrong. Okay. Well, you know, that tube was really thoroughly burned in. Was it? Because how do we burn anything when there's no oxygen? Okay. What I mean by that is the idea is that you plug this tube in, and with no high voltage, you let the filaments run. If this thing has been sitting for a year or two, you really want to do that. Inside the tube is a thing called a getter, which is a piece of metal, and it's heat activated. Okay. When they make the tube, underneath this tip, there's a little tiny vacuum nipple that's made of nickel cooper, and then the top attached to that's a little Schrader valve, and they put this thing on a pump, and they pull the inside of the bell cavity and the resonant dome on the inside of the tube. They pull it down to it very close to vacuum. Well, you reach a certain point where there's still some gases floating around in here, but you can't. We're talking 2 or 3, you know, little molecules of oxygen or nitrogen or helium or CO2 or, you know, our normal everyday air. We can pull that down to where it's almost very close to a vacuum, but it's not perfect. So what they do is they have a magnetic inductant heating element that sits in a specific place on the tube, and the getter material inside reacts with that magnetic field, and it gets hot. Well, when it gets hot, the getter material, the molecules of the getter material expand, just like everything else. When it gets hot, it expands a little bit. And the extra trace gas molecules are drawn to that getter material, and they become embedded in the material. They don't actually burn, because we want this thing to be as pristine on the inside as we possibly can achieve. Why would we want to have smoke and soot and dirt and nastiness? No, they get absorbed into the getter material. That makes sense? So as this tube is sitting for a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, and doesn't get used, those little bits of trace molecule gas work their way out of the getter, and they become free float, and they just flow around on the inside of the chamber, the inside of the tube. So when you hear somebody talk about burning in, what they're talking about is they're letting the filaments provide heat to the base of the tube, and the getter materials become warm. So what we do is we take the tube, put it in the socket, we remove the high voltage from the top of the tube, we let the filaments sit here and run for a few hours, like 5 or 6, and what happens is if there's any spare little bits of oxygen, nitrogen, whatever in here, they get reabsorbed back into the getters, and it locks the getters back in place. Those little bits of oxygen, nitrogen, and whatever, you can screw the entire tube up if you don't do this process, especially on something that has been manufactured, been used, and then sat for a long period of time. So it's just like the 3500Z. When I say do the smoke bottle test, we kind of do the same thing, but we do it over a lot longer period of time when it comes to this style of tube. Just saying. We plug it in, we turn it on, we put air on it, and we let it sit. The filaments will heat up. The getter material will reabsorb what's left inside. If you don't do this process, the odds are probably pretty good that when you go to put high voltage on this tube, you're going to have an internal arc. The insulation value between the screens, the filaments, all the little baby bits on the inside of the tube is compromised due to those little bits of extra molecule. So now lecture's over. Let's pull the lid off and take a look. I've never been a fan of this gold erudite coating. I get it. It was cheap. It works. Man, it just wants to oxidize. Okay, so we've got both the tins pulled off, top and bottom, just so we can look at everything. This is our tap cover. Okay, this is our cover that allows us to have access to the taps of the amplifier. It says on here, from the factory, this thing is set for 220 volts. If we want to run 120 volt operation, we have to jumper pins 2 to pins 4 and pins 3 to pins 5. So 2 to 4, 3 to 5. Well, what we've got going on here is pins 3 to pins 4. So 220 volt operation. And hit, see that? We're going to take 2 and jump it to 4. So what I need to do is I want to set this up for 110 volts so we can turn it up and down on the variac real easily. because my Variac that's 220 weighs 1,000,000 pounds. I don't want to drag that over here. We're going to take this and we're going to jumper pins 2 and 4. So we'll go 2 to 4, and then we're going to add a jumper on 3 to 5, and that'll put us on 110 volts. That makes sense? The inside of this thing looks great. It's got dust on it. The tube doesn't look that rough. I mean, here, I'll slide the tube out here in a minute. The bottom of this thing, the main reason that we're looking at the bottom of this is that we want to inspect all these traces, make sure nothing's burned, nothing's melted, nothing's gotten hot. And I don't see any signs of that. The inside of this thing, the main thing that we're looking at is to make sure our connections on our band switch are still hot and good and clean. I want to make sure our time on tube, this little tube in the front corner, is in good shape. I got to go get the air compressor. We're going to blow this out because, well, it's just full of dust. We'll take our relay file and we'll go across our relay here in the back. We'll go across this here. We're looking to see if the caps have leaked anything, if anything's loose. I don't see any of that stuff. So the first thing I want to do is I want to wire this for 110 volt down here. Wire that up for 110. I'll put a 110 volt plug on the end of this after I clean this mess up. And pull the tube. We're going to bypass our safety interlock and we're going to bring it on with a Variac nice and slow. The reason we're bypassing our safety interlock, so you and me can have the cinematic enjoyment of watching this thing turn on. Otherwise, you would never bypass this, so don't. Just get that out of your mind. Okay, so I've got a Variac all hooked up, wired for 110. I did take the air box off the back, so I got to look in and look at the back of the tube socket. I evaluated the band selector. We'll cover that here in a minute. So we've got it on, we got it on operate, and we got it on sideband. We're going to need all of those settings. Let's zoom in here for a second. Get this all framed up. So what we're looking for is when we turn this thing on, we're going to watch the voltage slowly climb. It's going to come up here to about, if I remember correctly, about 1900 volts. It's going to sit there until the warm-up time on circuit says we're good to fly. This will kick on, and because we've got it set in SSB, which is going to be the high plate voltage tap, this will kick on. We're using a Variac because the Variac is a very good tactile response. I like to be able to feel for it like Braille. As I bring the voltage on, you'll be able to feel it. If it's fighting you, like if you've got an electrolytic that's bad, a rectifier that's bad, something is bad, it will fight you over here. You will feel it. Go ahead, we'll bring on the Variac and let's start bringing this up because we've got a little bit of time between when I start bringing the volts up and when this actually starts to do something. Yeah, see our plate volts are already coming up. We're at 15 volts now, 20, 30, yeah, 40, 45, 50, 60, 65, 70, 80, 95, 100, yeah, we're fine. Looks like we've got a bulb that's out though. 105, 110, 115, 120 volts. Remember, we live in a 120 volt 240 universe. So what will happen is the little tube that's in there, it'll take 3 to 5 minutes and it'll warm up and then it's going to say, okay, the tube, whoa, that was quick. Made ready light come on. What it's doing is it's warming up. It's waiting for the tube to warm up. Okay. The idea with this tube, and this is our tube here, you can tell that this thing comes from the northwest corner. It's basically a rainforest up there. Okay. This is the top side of the tube. This is our iMac. We got to judge it by looking at the base. We can see this doesn't have a lot of operation time on it. If you look at the top side of the tube, it looks pretty scotty. But you got to take into account where the tube come from. This thing has been in operation in the northwest and it's a little moist in the northwest. Okay. You just get condensation on stuff. I don't see anything wrong with this other than it's visually just a little dirty. So we have the tube pulled out, of course, because we don't have a short. But the main thing that we're looking at is right here. Let's zoom on in here for a second. We're looking at how solid this voltage response is. Let's drop it down to CW, and we can see our bleeders are working good. Right? There's our 1700 volts. And what we're looking for is to see how quickly this comes up and goes and locks it solid. So if we were to click this over and it get to 2500, then it slowly starts creeping up like over to like 28, 27, then we know we got a cap breaking down. It's just a visual indicator. The other way to test for it is that we put a voltmeter on it and see if we got any AC leakage. I don't think we're going to need to do that. The caps are in great condition. I got a little machine that I hooked onto it, and it tells me that we've got more than plenty of electrolytic going on, so I don't think we're going to have any problems. I really don't. Let's let this sit here for a minute. I think we're going to be just fine. Let me bleed the high voltage off. We're going to get out our chicken stick now. And we got to go through all the safety steps. Because remember, boys and girls, this thing wants to kill you at all times. We don't ever trust this voltmeter unless we can verify it, which we haven't bothered to verify yet, which we will. Get out our chicken stick. We're going to grab up a ground on the side of the cabinet. We're going to let this bleed down to as close to zero as we can get it, and then we're going to go and we're going to neutralize the circuit. While it's neutralized, we're going to bond it. We're going to ground to the edge of the cabinet. First thing we do is to make sure that we're unplugged. We visually verify that we're at zero, pretty close to it. Let's go in here. We're grounding against the anode wire. We're going to hold this in place for a few seconds. And we're going to leave this bonded out. And we're going to put a jumper in here so it's safe to go work. We're going to install the tube and bring the tube on. All right, so let's go through this whole thing one more time. Now the tube is in the socket. I'll go over that as soon as we get started on the startup process here. $120 volts. Come on. Come on. Okay. Who knows when that, there it goes. We've already lit it once, so come on, quick. Plate volts we're not worried about right now. As you can see, the tube is in, but nothing is attached to the top of the anode. Now what we'll do is we'll run this for probably the next 6 hours. I'm just going to let it sit here and marinate and think about things, and we're going to watch the tube. Just take a minute to boot. We're going to watch your exhaust air temperature coming off the tube and make sure it's coming up in temp. So we'll let it sit here and just cook for a little bit, and then what we'll do is we'll run the high voltage off, we'll bleed it down, we'll neutralize it, I'll go reattach it to the anode, and then we'll bring it on really slow. We're trying to prevent having an arc inside the tube. But once we get the tube hot, first couple times, never have to worry about that again until, well, unless it sits for like another 6 months or a year. So, we're almost there. Oh yeah, but the tube's already warming up. You can... Yeah, that tube's good. Well, it's taking filament and it's lighting. That's what we mean by good. So let's let it sit here and marinate for a bit and we'll be back. So I put the tube in it. and I got high voltage connected, and we were making a little bit of power with it. I don't think this thing's been modified for 11 meter or 10 meter band, but the problem we're having is this here. I think our high voltage board is done. We're just about ready to be. It was sitting there for the last 5 hours running, and I didn't have any problems with it. The instant I stepped on the foot pedal, I could hear it going, and then I'd come off the pedal, back on the pedal, and I'm like, okay, I got something breaking down. Sure enough, this capacitor is way hotter than all of its fellow friends, which tells me internally, it's this one right here with the red dot on top, tells me internally that electrolytic's starting to fail. Now I have, around here someplace, don't ask me where, but someplace, I have another one of those electrolytics. But I think what we're going to do is we're going to see how things go with trying to deal with the new Harbach situation. Harbach here recently got purchased, or something, some kind of deal went down. And the reason I say some kind of deal went down is that I seen a thing on the web where they were talking about how another gentleman out there is going to handle the distribution for the guy that ran Harbach. Or something like that. I don't know. It's none of my damn business. I'm just interested to see if that stuff's going to get sent. So I'm off to go to the internet. I'm off to go call the customer. Yeah, it's time. So when we come back, we're going to have to come back to this in a couple weeks, obviously. When we come back to this, we'll have new boards and we'll get her fixed up. Well, put $100 worth of caps inside this thing. Let's check out the old ones. So this style of cap is kind of unique. It utilizes the outside pins and the body of it is ground. In some of the older models, they put paper insulators over these. These caps, I don't want to say are impossible to find, but they're getting pretty tough. Yeah. So this should be 100 UF at 500 volts DC, and we're seeing 127 UF on this. Now, all of these were technically good, except for this one. So let's see what it reads, because this cap was getting hotter than a firecracker, and it was ready to let the poop clean out of it. Open circuit or low capacitance. Right there. So let's check the one in front of it. .123, so that one's still technically good. Let's check the one post. Can't tell, I took these out in order. 120. ESR numbers are still pretty good on these. .124. We did that one already. Let's try this one here. ESR is better on that cap than we've seen on any of the others yet. ESR numbers low, capacitance is good. Capacitance on this one's a little low, and ESR is getting ready to go low. So this one's just about on the borderline of going bad. With Harbach being out of business for the moment, and their new management team, we'll have to see how this goes. I mean, I hate doing repairs like this. I hate doing, I don't want to say half-assed, because it's not that. $100+ in parts and a good portion of my afternoon and having to modify the capacitance board. We got this rebuilt. I just washed everything with rubbing alcohol to get it all nice and clean. Now I got to wait for everything to evaporate. So I probably won't be able to work on this thing until tomorrow, actually like physically test it. But this thing is done. So, till tomorrow, gentlemen. So, here we are. Got the thing all set up. Got the new filter board installed. Everything's tested. Not filter board, but filter capacitors. So as you can see, we've obviously got strong plate volts. Now we are on 110 volts, but we're on a committed 30 amp outlet just for testing. We've got everything cranked to 11. So here's our resting voltage. That's our high voltage. Everything's working perfect. We'll go over here. So that's a 1000 watt slug in 2X here, 1000 in average. Of course, the 5 watt slug in reverse, but putting about 130 watts of drive in it. One, two. I'm about 18 and some change. Trying to make a little bit more. The end of the story is this thing is fine. We've even went and modified it. So we're good to go and good to go. So that's what it is. Hello, and one. Got good input SWR. Hello, one. Not that it's going to hurt anything, because it won't. We drive this a little bit harder with a couple hundred watts. We'll get a whole lot more out of it, I think. So here we are. Got the thing all set up. Got the new filter board installed. Everything's tested. Not filter board, but filter capacitors. So as you can see, we've obviously got strong plate volts. Now we are on 110 volts, but we're on a committed 30 amp outlet just for testing. We've got everything cranked to 11. So here's our resting voltage. That's our high voltage. Everything's working perfect. We'll go over here. So that's a 1000 watt slug in 2X here, 1000 in average. Of course, the 5 watt slug in reverse, but putting about 130 watts of drive in it. One, two. I'm about 18 and some change. Trying to make a little bit more. The end of the story is this thing is fine. We've even went and modified it. So we're good to go and good to go. So that's what it is. Hello, and one. Got good input SWR. Hello, one. Not that it's going to hurt anything, because it won't. We drive this a little bit harder with a couple hundred watts. We'll get a whole lot more out of it, I think.